I'm your host, Ariel.
And I'm your host, Alyssa,
Welcome to Ghost Tea Podcast.
a podcast for those who seek magic.
Hello, ghosties. Welcome back.
Today, we are discussing a very important topic in the realm of spirituality, and that is toxic spirituality and ethics, including some red flags to watch out for.
Yes, and today we also have a guest with us, which we will introduce. But before we get started, we just want to remind everyone that everyone has different views on things, and that's okay. We don't ask you to believe what we do. We just want to share what we've found in our personal path with others. And we have our special guest, Becca Fern. Well, we call
Hello.
her Becca Fern, but Becca of the Mystics Lounge. You will have recognized her if you listened to our episode about Celtic Druidry. She was an amazing guest on that episode, and we wanted to have her back for this topic because we talk about this a lot in our coven chats and things like that. So we felt like we wanted to have her part of this conversation because we have
Mhm.
a lot of very similar views, and she has a lot of really cool takes that we wanted to include.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, I had so much fun on that episode, so thank you so much for having me back again.
Yeah, it was
Hell
so much
yeah.
fun. I loved it.
It was fun, and you are full of knowledge, and we love your perspectives. And so I think this is going to be a really interesting episode for our ghosty listeners so that we can touch on some things that inevitably you will come across in your spiritual journey as you navigate the world of spirituality and the people who are also in it. So, toxic spirituality is a particularly important topic to become aware of, including the red flags and ethics when you are involved in the spirituality, witchcraft community, and so on, paganism. It doesn't matter what community that you're a part of. If you are a spiritual person or you integrate spirituality, these are going to be really helpful conversational topics for you guys so that you know what to look out for from other people, especially because with spirituality, there is a lot of predatory behavior that can come along from it. And we will be discussing what that might look like. So it's for your own safety to know and to be educated, and also to help educate others and to keep some things in mind for your own back pocket.
Yes, and I think this is such an important topic too because we know a lot of you have been practicing for a while, but there are people who are new to their practices or aren't even practicing yet. And we want you to be able to have a clear idea of what to look out for if you're getting a reading from someone or if you are reading for someone, how to form your own ethical boundaries and your own spirituality to be in a healthy way so that you feel good about how you approach your work.
Yep. Fuck yeah. So let's dive in.
Okay.
I'm excited. Okay.
And yeah,
So
it's
I'll
and we're
just
not gonna hold our punches either. I'm sorry, we're
Yeah.
not.
no,
It's just
because
This is
such an important topic to discuss that you can't
yeah,
really sugarcoat it because
yes.
then people get
yeah.
the wrong idea.
No, you
Mhm.
can't sugarcoat it because it needs its time in the lights spotlight so we know what it looks like
Yeah,
because
we
it's
gotta
pretty ugly.
expose the dark underbelly.
The underbelly. So I'm going to start off first with just listing a few of the subcategories within toxic spirituality, and then we can expand on it. So, toxic spirituality encompasses a few things. It's not just one singular thing. You'll find that toxic spirituality can encompass spiritual superiority, spiritual bypassing, gaslighting, and spiritual manipulation, materialistic or consumerist approaches to spirituality, and of course, exclusionary or discriminatory practices.
So the first one with spiritual superiority, this is people who typically think that they're better or more important than others because their spiritual beliefs are better than others or more important, or they understand things that other people don't understand, or their practices are seen as superior to others. They
Mhm.
might put other people down or look down on those who don't believe the same things or follow the same path. You're not doing this right, or you can't hex someone because I don't feel good with hexing someone. Like it's very much this pedestal game of like I'm higher up than you are and kind of like this competition thing. But
Right.
this can lead to a very judgmental and exclusionatory way of approaching things. So it can make it harder for people to be empathetic or understanding of other people's practices.
Mhm.
And
So I'm curious to hear your thoughts when it comes to spiritual superiority. Like, have you experienced it? If so, like, what are your thoughts about it? Or have you noticed yourself doing this? Because I think I'm gonna call myself out a couple times in this episode for sure.
oh yeah,
Mhm.
I have a quick story about this. First, I want to say that you will typically see superiority in people. The easiest way to spot it is when they other themselves. Like when they're
Mm,
talking about being
mhm.
more connected to the divine or to spirit, or they're the only one that can utilize some kind of ability or gift. And there's no way that you can possibly catch up to where they're at, is where you'll most easily
Yeah.
see spiritual superiority. But for myself, I definitely at one point in time, because I am a generational practitioner, when I was first starting out, I definitely felt this kind of superiority complex for a little bit before I was very much called out on it, just because of I had easier access to knowledge and being able to be taught my craft and my path. And so for a little bit, whether it was intentional or not, it was definitely there and it was within my bias until I was called out on it and was told, like, just because you are generational and just because it runs in your family does not mean shit. So don't act like it,
Yeah.
because by acting like you're better than other people, you are doing yourself a disservice, because you immediately are not credible and you are immediately not taking part in the true form of the craft, which is to step outside of your own ego and truly participate in the craft.
Right, and I
Mhm.
also struggled with that when I was first kinda opening up to my spiritual practice because as a lot of you know, like, my background is from a religious background, Christianity specifically, and so coming in from that place of still deconstructing and stuff like that, it was very much like an empowerment thing, and I just put off my egotism and like superiority complex in my practice to, oh, I'm just stepping into my power. I'm just
Mhm.
empowering myself. I'm just feeling really confident about myself, things like that. But really, it was just me feeling like I needed to prove myself to the people in my past. And it made me almost like blow myself out of proportion to make them feel like they couldn't touch me. It was very much like an insecurity thing of me projecting this idea of like, I'm superior because I am doing something that you're not doing, and like things like that, which is obviously toxic. And I don't think that I really even realized I was doing it until I started going through the deconstruction process. And then I was like, oh shit, look at that. What about you, Alyssa?
I have experienced, I would say, the heaviest exposure to toxic spirituality has been since becoming a TikTok creator, and
Mm,
I
Mhm.
mhm.
do see it prevalent in the
It's
community
everywhere.
at,
It's everywhere.
like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
record
It's
amounts. It's
yes.
insanity. And I've also fallen victim to spiritual superiority as far as people doing it to me. So this would be if I have an opinion, a personal opinion that doesn't match what the other person's experience or opinion is, then the vitriol that can come from that is pretty astounding, even though one can share one's opinion with the empathy and understanding that we're all on our own journey, and that's okay. Where you have to watch out with that is with not allowing colonization practices or cultural appropriation or things like that
Right.
to
Yeah.
seep into your practice. So it's important to walk a line between being empathetic and understanding and just accepting that other people will do what they do, but also being very aware of the realities of the fact that cultural appropriation is a huge deal and happens all the time, and to
Mhm.
make efforts to decolonize your practice. So I feel like spiritual superiority can kind of walk a line sometimes
Oh, yeah,
in that
absolutely.
way.
Yeah. I feel like it does dip into appropriation in the
Mhm.
sense of, like, having come from Christianity and then going into New Age spirituality before coming to my path now, there is a lot of this idea of, like, well, why is it closed to me? Like, it is a very colonizer mindset.
Mhm.
Like, why
Mhm.
isn't this available to me? It should be
Mhm.
because I'm a person and like, like it just should be. And of course that's wrong, but like there there's a lot of support for that kind of thinking within new age belief systems too. And a lot of modern witchcraft practices because it's like, oh, well, the earth grows white sage, so why wouldn't everybody be able to use it, And it's not about that. It's about the sacredness and the use of it within sacred practice within an indigenous
Mhm.
practice,
Mhm.
right? That's not for people outside of that practice. So
Mhm.
things like that. And I do think that that can be linked with spiritual superiority because it is putting
Yeah.
yourself in a space of thinking, "Oh, I am superior enough to use this. Like
Yeah,
I
that you're, like,
should be
above
able to."
the
Right.
ground
The
rules.
rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
and
like above the law.
that's exactly where it can be tricky. So it's being able to have the knowledge and education on those important topics of decolonizing your practice and understanding cultural appropriation and what's available to you and what is not as far as ingredients and spirits and things like that and
Right.
what's a closed practice, etc. While also having the respect and understanding that another person is going to is going to have a practice that doesn't look like yours. Everybody
Right.
is walking their own path.
Mhm.
So that's kind of why I felt it was important to draw that connection because I can see it going, and we all have seen that. We've all seen it go
Oh,
that
yeah.
far where
Well, and it
people
takes time. It
take that
takes time
stance.
to, like, integrate new ways of thinking about things too. Like,
Mhm.
this is
Mhm.
it takes time
Right.
to reframe the neural pathways of, like, constantly going to this one pathway and having to rewrite that. It's okay to take time to decolonize your practice as long as you're doing it. Like, if you
Yep.
have
Right.
information that is coming for you that is helpful and helps you look at your practice critically, then that's good. Are you always going to be able to make those changes right away and integrate them on the deepest level? Probably not, but the effort being there is what matters. That's really what matters is the effort is being put there. So don't beat yourself up if that's something that you're still working on because it takes time.
Yeah. And I do wanna say, like, there's not a single one of us that have not been touched by toxic spirituality in some way,
Mhm.
within ourselves, things that we have done in toxic spirituality or been affected by others who are presenting toxic spirituality. So
Yeah.
in this process of discussing this, if you have been somebody who has portrayed these traits of toxic spirituality, it is not a shame point. It's more of
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have awareness of it now. And if you didn't know you're doing these things, take a look at it now. So
Yeah.
it's never like we all said, we're all calling ourselves out in this episode too for things that we have done before. So it's not a shame point, it's a learning point.
Mhm.
Yeah. And the spiritual spirit superiority thing too, I also want to mention is a common thing that's used within cults. So a lot of the talking points that we're going to go through in this episode, when we have them all together, that's like major red flag because
Mhm.
these elements all together can really point towards being in a space of cult like behavior, especially if it is a small group of people or a large group of people or one person who is putting themselves as the superior point, right? That everybody
Mhm.
comes to, that you'll see that a lot in churches too, of like, well, the pastor knows best because he's like closest to God. And so things like that. So it's important to be able to like keep these in mind when you're, becoming part of spiritual groups and things like that. You might notice one or two, and that's just part of being within spiritual communities in general. It's going to be there, it's going to be present. But as long as we have the awareness to look out for it, that's really what we're trying to do here is give you little flags that you can have in your head of being like, ooh, that's toxic. Don't like.
Yep.
So let's move on to spiritual bypassing because we've seen a lot of this.
Oh boy.
So
Yeah.
many. Alyssa, why don't you start?
So spiritual bypassing, for those who don't know what that is basically when people will use their spiritual beliefs or their practices to sidestep or avoid dealing with their own emotional or personal problems. So that would be someone who's just pretending that everything is fine. They're ignoring real emotions, real feelings. And the reason why they do this is because it makes them feel, or they believe that it makes them seem more spiritually enlightened or positive, which can prevent them from truly understanding their emotions and resolving their issues. And it lends itself to toxic positivity.
Yes, and this can
Mhm.
also be a problem with people utilizing, messages from, like, deities
Yes.
as
Yeah.
ways for them to put through their own messages from those deities as a mask for,
Mhm.
like, that spiritual bypass of, like, "Oh, well, if it's coming from me, they won't listen to it, but if it's coming from this deity that they work with," things like that. So that's hard
Right.
too because if someone is really wanting connection with a deity that maybe they're having trouble getting in contact with, and someone is like
Oh, sorry.
Kitty!
He
the
agrees.
kitty. The
He's
kitty is
passionate
talking
about it.
about the podcast.
He's like, "Sing."
He's like, "Actually, I have a message." I have a message from Bastet. Um,
And his spiritual bypassing is bullshit.
My name is Lord Kitterton, and ye shall hear me roar.
but yeah, like people will use the excuse of, I have this message from a deity that you're working with, and they told me this. And sometimes it can be our own bias or that person's bias coming through in that message. And sometimes people don't even realize that they're doing it. Like,
Mhm.
I want to make it clear that a lot of times, I don't want to say all the time because obviously there is some awareness, but there can be times when people don't even realize they're doing something that's toxic because they genuinely feel that it is intuition or, a deity giving this information or something like that. But
Mhm.
there does have to be some awareness when you are getting messages for someone if they've asked you to do that where confirming the messages in multiple ways outside of just your intuitive stuff can be really, really helpful in kind of dispelling any second guessing of whether or not that is intuitively picked up on or it's related to your own bias.
Right.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
spiritual bypassing can also, I mean, this relates to what Alyssa was talking about with toxic positivity. I've
Hmm.
seen this a lot on like live streams and things like that.
Yeah.
Where people are talking about like when people are having like real life problems or real life emotional
Yes.
or mental distress and they're like, well, if you just like meditate more or if you just do this more
Yeah.
in your practice, and that's not the answer. Are they
Yeah.
helpful tools that can be used alongside of real problem solutions? Yes, but like
Right.
the painting everything with this like broad brush of like you have to like do light and love and like forgive everything and like let go of it. That's not
Right.
realistic, nor is it okay, nor is it handling your problems.
Yeah.
And when it comes to forgiveness, especially and toxic spirituality and spiritual bypassing, this is a topic that really frustrates me because forgiveness can be so misconstrued by people who use spiritual bypassing.
Yes.
They elicit this idea that forgiveness or letting go of things that have happened to you in your past looks like, just like everything's fine now. I just chose
Yeah.
to forgive it. I just chose to let
Or
it
like,
go
"You're
and I
drinking
chose
the
to be
poison meant
fine.
for someone else." And I'm just like,
Right.
"Ugh."
And, like, at the end of the day, like, with this and I'm sorry this is a little bit of a tangent, but, like, at the end of the day, forgiveness is for you, and it never, ever, ever has to look like looking at anything that has happened to you and saying, "That is okay. That
Yeah.
person is good in my
Yeah.
book." For all of eternity, you can say, "Fuck that person and fuck what
Yes.
happened. That was not okay." But it's about
Yes.
figuring out where do we go from here and how do I not hold that against myself anymore. But people who
Yes.
use spiritual bypassing will use it as a tool of being like, well, you're not enlightened if you can't just let it go, if you can't just like choose to be happy. Like, wow, Patricia, I never thought of that. Like,
Well, because it's ignoring that, like, I mean, I hate to call it the shadow aspect of us, but, like, we all know where I'm talking about, but I don't have a
right.
better word to use. But, like, that part of us that we just kind of shun or don't look at or we don't wanna acknowledge, like those things are there. We
Yeah, the
have to be aware of them.
compartmentalized part.
Yeah, yeah, because it's like trying to ignore your depression and being like, "Oh, I'm not depressed. I can just, say that I'm not depressed, and then I'm not depressed anymore."
Yeah,
Like,
Okay,
I didn't
so
everybody
face
that
mask today, so I'm good. Like,
that is
Yeah.
literally what I want to call out right now is one thing that I have noticed has gained a lot of traction in popular media and has been a concept that's been perpetuated a lot basically since COVID. And it falls perfectly in line with what you were just saying and falls under spiritual bypassing and toxic positivity. And that is the fucking law of attraction. I
oh my
hate
god,
it.
Oh,
yes.
no. Oh, no. You just activated the anger point in
I
all of
think like
us.
my soul opened and screamed inside right now.
For those who don't know what the law of attraction is, let me just give you a really brief overview of it. So basically, law of attraction, or abbreviated to be LOA, is the idea that like attracts like, that similar things are attracted to one
Yes.
another
Oh my
insofar
god.
that if you are thinking negatively, then you will attract negative experiences.
Yeah.
Whereas
Which is
if you
like
think
Which is
yeah.
positively,
ridiculous.
if you think positively, it will produce desirable positive
Yeah.
experiences.
All of that
So
makes me so anxious. Let me just tell you, like,
no,
I
it's
have
horrible.
anxiety. We all have anxiety, like, all of us 3. But, like,
It's
that
so
that
bad.
shit sets mine off.
Yeah.
Like, that makes me so I still deal with that. I still deal with that every single time I do spell work. I have to fight with my brain from being programmed to think that way to be like, it literally doesn't matter. Because let's say you're dealing with depression, right? And you want to do a spell for yourself just to kind of like help yourself feel better, like you're doing something, right? In your practice to maybe ease that a little bit. Obviously, not a replacement for medication. We all know that. But
Mhm.
as a way for you to do something actionable that can help you maybe calm your nerves a little bit and feel like you're making progress in a physical way. You cannot be like, "Oh, let me turn off my depression for 5 minutes while I do this
No, but
working
that's
to help
literally
me
what it
with my
is. It's
depression."
ableist.
Honestly.
It's
It's
so
so
fucking
stupid.
ableist. It's the
It
most
is,
Yeah,
it
the
is.
idea
shit
that
I've
you can
ever
just
heard.
make a choice for like
Yeah,
real life things to not exist
as
is
if
so
we
ridiculous because it's like saying
yeah,
like cars don't drive. Like what?
yeah, yeah, or like, don't you think if we could do that, we wouldn't even be struggling with it in the first
Right.
place?
Do you think
Like,
No,
I
but
it's
what it
haven't
is
like I haven't asked for that every day of my life? Like
right, right.
and what it is it's this, and the people who use it, the people who teach it, talk about it, perpetuate it, and push it. What the people on the receiving end don't seem to understand is that they are absorbing a concept that puts the blame entirely on you for
oh
Yes.
feeling
yeah.
things.
Oh my
Which
god, and
is
it's
we see
not
that a
your
lot
fault.
in Christianity. Like,
Yes.
Mhm.
you see that a
Yes.
lot in Christianity, and it's just
Mhm.
taking that and repackaging it as something more palatable to people who have first pulled away from
Yes.
Christianity because it feels kind of like home while feeling a little bit better.
Yep.
Yes, and I just wanna state here, for anyone out there who is wondering why you are struggling so much in life and things are just going really badly, or you are struggling to pay your bills or your rent or your car payments or whatever the fuck you're struggling with, capitalism, babes. It's
Yeah.
fucking capitalism. It's not you, it's them, and I just wanna say that because
And
sometimes we need the
literally
reminder.
and literally everything else going on in this hellscape of a world right
Yeah,
now, there's so much going on. I
it's a
promise you it's not
lot.
because you had anxiety on a Thursday.
Yeah.
Like
Yes, that.
It's a really important thing to watch out for, and I'm highlighting it now as a red flag, and we'll talk about the red flags a
Yes.
little bit later, and I will absolutely make the connection to the people who perpetuate the law of attraction so that you know exactly what to look for. But
Yes.
that's unfortunately, that is the kind of content that gets printed in magazines. That's the kind of
Yes.
shit that goes in little shorts on your YouTube and
Mhm.
TikToks and your Instagram. Everywhere you look, there's law of attraction or some type of repackaged bullshit that is similar to, if not exactly that. And it
Yeah.
is so unbelievably toxic.
Yes. So, Becca, would you like to get into the next point of
Sure.
gaslighting and spiritual manipulation?
Yeah, so gaslighting and spiritual manipulation. This is very prevalent within the community. There are people who use spiritual or religious ideas to control or manipulate others. They might make others feel like their emotions or experiences are wrong or invalid. They may act like they have special knowledge or power, and they use it to take advantage of others and make them do what they want them to do, not
So
what the person
scary.
feels like they should be doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's terribly prevalent in
Mhm.
TikTok spaces, YouTube spaces, like it's everywhere. It's everywhere. But this we do also see this within religious circles as well, like Christianity and things like that, of, you someone having an experience and sometimes it's even validated in the moment and then later invalidated. And that can be really scary too. Like if, for example, maybe someone has an experience with a deity or something like that, you have an experience that you have and you share it with someone and someone's like, "Wow, that's really amazing." Like, "Yeah, I've had an experience with them too." And then later when you try to talk to them about it, they're just like, "Yeah, I don't know for sure if you were interacting with that deity. Like, what if it
Right.
was someone else?" Even though they validated it at the time. And that can be a really amazing way to invalidate someone's practice.
And this one
um,
is so closely linked to the spiritual superiority. They go hand
Mhm.
in
yes,
hand,
They do.
more
yes.
so than I think the others go hand in hand.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. Well, it's
1,000%.
it's the it's the concept of the superiority of being like being in a space where you feel that you are superior enough to judge and exclude, so too can you feel like you're in a space to take advantage and control another person's experiences and gaslight them into thinking the way that you do. And
Right.
that is cult leader behavior. And we
Yes.
do see that even today. It's this behavior is it's dangerous in the sense that this one also kind of walks a line too, though, similar to the spiritual superiority and being sure not to allow cultural appropriation and colonizing practices and stuff like that. But this one also walks a line in the sense that you do not want you want to be aware of real issues in the spiritual community such as psychosis, and so you
Yeah.
want to be able to have some general understanding of it. Never diagnose someone if you're not a professional, but
Yeah.
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
reason why I say this one kind of walks that line is because if somebody's coming to you and saying, "This is my experience, it's super real to them,"
Mhm.
it could possibly be, depending on what they're telling you,
Right.
exhibiting spiritual psychosis, which is a very real problem. So it's
Yes.
kind of one of those things where it's like in a person's regular practice, if they're like, "Hey man, like I'm gonna give you a personal example." So for me as a baneful practitioner, I believe that there is light and dark in any ingredient that you have. So I will
Right.
use lavender in baneful magic. And there have been people who were like, "Well, I don't use it because I don't believe you can use it in a negative way. So therefore, if you do, you're wrong, and everything you do is invalid as a result." So that would be a good example of gaslighting me into feeling like what works for me shouldn't work for me. Whereas if somebody's coming at you and saying, "I believe I'm a reincarnated God, and everything that I'm being told is my job to change the world, and it's my
Mhm.
job to convince everybody to follow my ideas, and that's real to me." Do you see where I'm going with this? Where it
Oh,
can
yeah.
be a line
Yeah.
between being like really something that you should take note of like what they're saying, and just it's contextual, right? This is all contextual. And you'll find that throughout this entire conversation, just like with almost every topic Ariel and I cover on Ghost Tea podcast, you'll want discernment.
With gaslighting and manipulation, kind of going with what Alyssa was saying, it definitely range from those two examples, but it also usually always starts small. It usually
Mhm.
Mhm.
always starts at that lavender level, which by the way, I
Yes.
also use in Baneful Workings. It's amazing.
It
But
is.
I really love using poppy seed.
Yep.
yeah.
Poppy seed's actually super good.
Mhm.
It's an
But it
opiate.
can start at those like really small levels where like people are saying things and you're like, I don't agree with that and I don't like how they're going about that. I can maybe excuse it because they have this other information and like I like the
Right,
things that they're
right.
doing here. But then
Mhm.
you'll notice gradually over time when people are allowed to get away with a level of gaslighting and manipulation, it always ramps up until you get to
Mm,
Yeah.
that level where they're like, I actually am a reincarnated God, and I
Yeah.
actually am here to lead you specifically, and you should feel so special that I have chosen you, and
Yes.
mhm,
that's why you should
Yes.
listen to me.
It's
yes.
absolutely the frog in the boiling water
Oh yeah.
metaphor.
Yep.
It's they will turn up the heat over time so slowly that you don't even realize it's a problem until other people see you and they're like, "Oh my god, are you okay?" Like,
Mhm.
Right.
it's because you just don't see it when you're in it, and I personally experienced people doing this to me as well, where, I would be doing something in my practice and they would act totally fine about it, and then I would come home and they would have, like, a list of things that I was doing wrong and, like, "Well, I don't think you should be doing that, and I don't think you should be doing this because spirit told me that this is, like, what you should be doing," and I was like, "This is really bad." Like, it
And
was your gut will tell you to. Like, I know it seems like it
right.
won't, but y'all have, like, instincts, right? And they are going to have indicators. Like, you might just feel really uncomfortable with something that someone is saying, and you might overthink it and be like, "You know what? It's nothing. I'm just making a big deal about nothing." Document it anyway. Document it anyway.
Right.
Like, if you can see over time that there's a lot of upsetting situations that are happening with someone or a creator or something like that, that's a good indicator that they're just not someone that you should be watching or
And
someone that you should be connecting to.
And also talk to other people. I'm not saying you have to handle this in the
Yeah.
comment section, that's probably the worst place to do it.
Right, right.
But
Because
if you
then they're
feel
gonna know.
uneasy yeah, if you feel uneasy about something or you're questioning what somebody has said and it's coming off a little like, that seems not quite right."
Mhm.
Whether it's with a creator on the internet or someone in your life, like in Ariel's circumstance, if you repeat back to somebody, to a third party, what is happening or the discussion, you may not realize it when you were saying it, if they have kind of trapped you in what they're saying,
Yeah.
but the other person will for sure hear it, and they'll be able to
Yes.
come back to you and be like, "Hey, I don't know about this." So if you're ever questioning or nervous about something that you've, like, heard or seen or a behavior that people are exhibiting and you feel like you're getting put into this little box or this cage, talk to someone about it, as well as what Ariel said, take note of it, like, clock
Yeah.
it.
And ideally, someone who's not within that circle that you're in, if it's a community or
Right.
someone who doesn't follow that person or follows them but is very critical of their things, because that's going to be someone who's looking at it from an outside perspective. Like, that, I think, is a trap that we see a lot within Christian circles is like you go for advice to other people who are within your community, and they're also going to be dealing with the gaslighting, so it's like they're probably
Right.
not going to notice the, red flags the way that someone outside of that community would, because
And
they're
it's
in it too. They're the boiling frog right next to you.
right, and it's in no way encouraging, like, dog pile behavior or, like,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
like, tearing somebody down when they're not in the room, basically. It's in no way encouraging that, but more of an objective discussion, like, taking the feelings out of it and looking at what is on the table and how do we feel about that? Looking at it without
right.
all of the extra ingredients, what is this that we're looking at?
I
Mhm.
also wanna add that there is this personal accountability as far as being aware of it and doing the best you can, while also acknowledging that the people who tend to be very good at at spiritual manipulation, will it's not your fault if you get manipulated,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
Oh, yeah,
you may have been
definitely
in a
not.
space in your life where you were vulnerable, and that's the people they prey on, that's the kind of
mhm,
people that's like cult leader stuff, and that's why I can't stop thinking about, like, for the example of, like, Waco, Texas, the
yep,
the
yep,
Seventh-day
Mhm.
Adventist, church, fringe offshoot of the Branch Davidians. Probably a lot of you have heard about it, and I highly encourage you to read about it and take a look at the behaviors that were exhibited from that particular cult. And it does have this start small sort of idea where it's manipulation on a small scale that gets even more intense and more extreme over time. And it's not your fault if you fall prey to a manipulation that is that has been honed over many, many years, because these are people who are very calculated. These are
Right.
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
who know how to manipulate others using the guise of spirituality or the guise of God/gods
Mhm.
to be behind them so that you don't question anything they say or anything they do.
Right.
Right. And like Becca said earlier, like it starts off small. Like you can start with conspiracy theories of just being
Mhm.
like, wow, did you realize that they're putting stuff in our food and stuff like that? And then it just slowly builds up. Like start with believable things and then move into just absolutely unbelievable things to anybody else. But at that point, they've built it up so much that you're just like, oh, well, if that's true, then of course this is true. Things like that. It's
Right.
really scary, but you don't even realize how quickly it can escalate. And a lot of times, like the people who are like, well, I would never be in a cult, like, I would never, are honestly sometimes the people who are most at risk because
Yep.
you think that you are absolutely unable to be influenced that way, and everybody is susceptible to it. Like,
Mhm.
anybody can be gaslit, and sometimes you won't even know it's happening until it's too late.
Mhm.
So, if you've ever been dealing with that, or if you've dealt with it, or if you're currently dealing with it, just know that it happens to the best of us. It happens to everybody, and we have all experienced at some point some form of manipulation or gaslighting, and it's not something to beat yourself up over. Like, it's just
Mhm.
it happens, unfortunately. Okay, so getting into the next point we have is materialistic or consumeristic approaches. Spirituality sometimes gets too focused on getting material things like having money or fancy spiritual practices and products that you use and tools and things like that. And it can make people feel like they're really important to have as part of spirituality, and it can make you lose sight of what really matters in your practice, which is just growing spiritually. And you don't really need any tools to grow spiritually. Now, I will say I fell into this trap recently, actually. I recently moved and I didn't have any of my stuff for like a week. And I was like, oh, it's going to be fine. But like, I felt so disconnected from my practice because I have grown so reliant on having candles available to me and my herbs and my ingredients and things like that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to use ingredients, but I do think it is important to try to have things in your practice outside of the tools that you use to help you feel comfortable during those times and to not beat yourself up for not having fancy tools to use or things like that because it doesn't mean that your practice is any less valid. It just doesn't look aesthetically pleasing or it doesn't look super fancy or it's not super expensive. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I would like to draw attention to, what I have noticed over my time as both a witch and as someone who offers services to other people and coaching. One of the things I've noticed is that it tends to stem from Wicca-centered material, and I'm going to explain what I mean. By the way, I have my own personal opinions on some of the beliefs that center around the religion of Wicca, but if that is something that you believe in, there's no problem with that. But I do want to draw attention to what I've noticed is that with the books that have been available up until within the last, I would say, maybe 5 to 10 years,
Yeah.
majority of them were Wicca centered, and with Wicca,
Yes.
there is a reliance on having what they believe to be the appropriate altar, meaning you have to have all these little pieces, you have to have a
Right.
chalice, you have to have an athame, you have to have, feather, and you have to have all these individual things, and then it gives the reader who's brand new to spirituality, the idea that that is the only way you can have a functional altar or an altar that will function at all, and
Right.
it's something that I've noticed that, our society commodifies whatever it can. Everything is, profit driven. So if there is something to make money off of, they will. So if you were to like Google like witch altar kits, you're probably going to see the appropriative white sage bundles. You're going to see an abalone shell. You're going to see probably a chalice. You're going to see some crystals. You're going to see chime candles. You're going to see feathers. You're going to see, like an athame. You're going to see all these things that have largely centered around the concept of a functional altar from Wicca. And again, I
Yeah.
feel like that directly stemmed from what kind of information was available prior to there being a more diverse selection of pagan and witchcraft books that we have today. But I do think that, and that's why we do see even today people confusing witchcraft to Wicca and thinking they're the same thing, or that if you're a witch, then you're a
Yeah.
Wiccan,
Yeah.
or if you're a Wiccan, then you're a witch, etc. So that's what I have noticed in my experience. It seems to
Mhm.
be a direct correlation between the two, but I do not know for sure if that is the same reality writ large. But from, like I said, what I've experienced from my own consumer is consuming books and resources and also helping people who have consumed their own books and resources, it tends to always funnel back to the first commodified piece of witchcraft, which tends to be Wicca centered.
Yeah, so those are all really good points. I definitely want to start out by saying, like, if you like the pretty things and the shiny things and, witchcraft tools and crystals and stuff like that, there's nothing wrong with that. And none of
Yeah.
us are saying that because who
Yeah.
doesn't? We all
Yeah.
love it.
It's
But I
pretty.
think the problem lies in when you have people telling you you have to have this one thing or you are not a true
Mhm.
practitioner. You have to
Yeah.
have these things or you are not worshiping correctly, or you
Right.
perpetuate that within your own practice. Because at the end of the day, the power lies within yourself. And
Mhm.
it's about being able to craft and hone your power. Are there things that can help you with that because of the energies that they hold or the different metaphysical properties that they have? Absolutely. Is it necessary to be a practitioner? Absolutely not. So
Yep.
while it's completely okay to have, crystals and, daggers and whatever you want to have for your practice that helps you celebrate your practice, it is important that you do not place all of the value of your practice in those material items rather than in yourself and what you are actually doing. And it's important to ask yourself the why behind what you're doing, not through the material things. Because I think the problem that comes with the materialism within the craft is that you lose sometimes if you place all of your value in the materialism, you lose the part of your brain that makes you actually do the work. You think that you
Mm.
have these
Yeah.
material things and you have them all set out, and well, you burn this candle with the herbs on it, but did you actually do any work in that process? Or did you
Right.
watch it burn down and that was that? So I think that's another problem is people rely on the material things to do the work for them without doing the work themselves because that's what they were told would make the car go.
Right. Yeah, because like, it's not the herbs, like, for example, herbs have metaphysical properties, right? We know this because we use them in our crafts, but it's not like, you can use herbs on a candle, but if you're not putting an intention into that candle, it's just an herbed up candle. Like, it's just a candle with herbs on it. Because, like, there is this kind of, like, I call it almost like an activation process that happens when you intentionally put the ingredients together. Like, you're not just throwing a bunch of things in a bowl and saying, "Okay, this is it. Like, cool. Fix me a little shit." Like, it's
Yeah.
nothing like that. It's about, like, putting these herbs in, and I've actually experimented with it myself of, like, if I just throw these herbs together for the same exact, intention as this other candle, doing it at the same time, same astrological things, whatever I have going that is contributing to that scenario and spell, I'm doing an activation with the herbs for one, singing to them, telling them what they're doing for me, asking them to assist, like things like that, and then chucking them all together in a bowl and pouring them on a candle in the other. And doing it to where I'm actually, like, putting that intention into it and really putting my own energy into it, but also asking of the energy of the plants or the intentions of the plants to be infused within that spell. It's so much more effective when I do that than it is when I don't. Like, actually changed my practice a lot when I started doing that. But that just goes to show you, like, yes, you can have all of the herbs that you want to do a working, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that working is going to work for you just because you have the herbs for it. Like, the herbs are only one part of the equation. And it's just it's 1/10 of it. You gotta put in the rest of it too for it to be working for you.
Mhm. And I think that we, especially at the beginning of our practice, are more susceptible to falling prey to the idea of I need to buy all of these herbs because
Yeah.
those are the only ones I see in the books.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Or, I need to buy all of these crystals because it's the only ones I see in the books. And again, coming full circle to exactly what Ariel and Becca have been saying, there is nothing wrong with having those tools. I have my own, they're fantastic. However, it is exactly the concept behind utilizing the tools as a way to sidestep um the personal self-discovery.
Yeah.
It's like, if I purchase this, my life will change, or it will give me the ability to change my life without actually doing the inner work and
Right,
the
right.
realizing of, like, your own personal goals. And coming back to what Becca said, and is my favorite thing to always ask people, is your why statement. Like, why are you pursuing spirituality? Why are you pursuing witchcraft? And no answer is right or wrong. It just is what it is. So be honest with yourself. So there is that aspect, but also too, if you are someone who has like myself, I have a very addictive personality and I hyperfixate. So if I hyperfixate on a particular topic, then I feel a weird sense of like pull that I need to have every single piece of whatever it is I'm reading or learning about. And I've done it with crystals, obviously. I've been a crystal collector for a long time. And that was one of my problems, was like, I need to have one of everything that exists.
Same, same.
And I feel like I feel like herbs and crystals are the 2 I see the most, where people are like, "I need to
Yeah.
have every herb that
Mhm.
Yep.
exists and every crystal that exists." And listen, like I said, it's fine to have those things, but don't put yourself in a place of detriment, or assume
Yeah.
that if you're missing something, that you cannot be successful in your craft, or that you
Yeah.
cannot be successful in your
Right.
spirituality.
Well,
So,
because there's
it's a balance.
substitutions for pretty much everything. Like, you can pretty much substitute everything at some point in some way. It might not be the way that you feel is most powerful to utilize that energy or put that intention into something, but it's still gonna work.
Oh,
Like
yeah. Like you can go to your backyard or
Mhm.
really anywhere, and anything that you need for whatever you're putting together, you can find.
Yep.
You don't
mhm,
have to have
mhm.
like the exact like 6 cloves and a sprig of rosemary and this and then that. Like you can
Mhm.
find substitutions everywhere and anywhere. And that's the beauty of the craft. It didn't start out with all of the materialistic objects and all of the
Yeah.
things. It
Well, because
didn't
they were
start out that
really
way
limited.
whatsoever. It started out with like, what can we forage? What can we do here? Like how can we use like our labor as an offering or like this and that? It didn't start out as like having all the fucking things. So
Right, right.
at this point in time, it still is not that. The essence of it is yourself and the ability that you hold and the power that you hold and how you use it and what you put it into in your life. It never has been about the material thing. So if somebody is telling you you have to have all of these things or you're not a true practitioner, red flag.
Mm.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
So the next subsection of toxic spirituality is exclusionary or discriminatory practices. So in some spiritual or religious groups, people are treated unfairly and left out because of things like their race, gender, sexuality, or social status. And this isn't right, and it goes against the principles of genuine spiritual growth and unity. It is important to include and respect everyone, no matter who they are or where they come from. I think it is important to also note that when we're talking about things like being left out because of things like race, for example, this does not include closed practices because closed practices
Yeah, yeah.
are inherently the initiation and the right to practice that is like base level that has to happen. There's no way
Yeah.
around it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So exclusionary and discriminatory practices are not included um, for like closed practices as far as race goes. If you're not
Mhm.
part of that practice, you're not part of it. But
Yeah.
you can see this in like, especially on TikTok, every once in a while something will go around about how like men can't be witches. And that is
Yeah.
crazy to me.
Yeah.
And that there are
Doesn't
different
make
like
sense.
kinds of practitioners and things like that based on your social status or your gender or sexuality and stuff like that. And that, like, there are some people who are less than. You'll see it every once in a while on TikTok. And that is a crazy thought process to me because it just doesn't make any sense. The
It
craft has
doesn't.
always been open for everyone.
Yeah. It's just it is for people. Anybody can be a witch.
Mhm.
Right.
Where I tend to see the exclusionary or discriminatory practices also in combination with the other things we've talked about with the spiritual superiority, as if they know better, which justifies why someone or some group of people would be excluded for some reason or another. Like, oh, my God said that, if you're bisexual, you can't experience spiritual ascension or some
Yeah,
bullshit
that's
like that, like, it tends
yeah.
to kinda go like, we're talking about these individually, but these are all interwoven in various different ways, and definitely highlighting exactly what Becca said, this does not include closed practices, you are not that is not that doesn't apply here. That is either for you or not for you. And it is the basis of having somebody who is explicitly saying you cannot be a part of this because of your race, gender, or sexuality or social status in the sense that it would otherwise be available to you without them saying that. So
Right.
let's say, I see this not to harp, I know you two are Norse pagans, but I have to bring it up.
Oh
Oh,
Um,
go
god,
for it.
in
Alyssa.
I'm sorry, it's we all see it, Norse paganism is unfortunately one of the ones where we
Yeah.
see this a lot when it comes to
Mhm.
race. You will have a lot of white supremacists and white supremacy ideals that hide behind Norse paganism or weave their white supremacy into Norse paganism as a way to exclude people who are not white or of different sexualities or social statuses, etc.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a really common thing used within the spiritual community to be like, "Oh, well, you don't have white heritage." And I'm like, "What does that even mean?"
Right.
What does that even mean? Like, so many of the indigenous people of England even were, like, dark-skinned.
Yeah, a lot of Celtic people, there are, the Celtic, like, the general, like, culture isn't just specifically in the UK, it's actually also in the Iberian Peninsula, so Spain and Portugal, because there was a migration from Spain and Portugal into the UK. It was when there was wars going on and things like that, but then people decided to stay, and it became ingrained in the culture. So you will see people who are Celtic and Celtic pagan that are not like, quote unquote stereotypically white. And that's the same thing with Norse paganism.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think we see this, too with and correct me if I'm wrong if this doesn't apply, but we see this too with practices like we were talking about this the other day with like Celtic paganism and even uh Scottish paganism, things like that from those European countries. They're like, "Well, you're in America. Like why would you be practicing our practices from
Oh,
our
yeah.
country?" But
This
like
happens to me all the time.
does that apply under that or would that not
Yes.
be? Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, I have people, my dad is an immigrant, and even if he wasn't, it does not matter. But I will on my TikTok, I will often talk about Celtic practices or Celtic history and things because that is my family, that is my heritage, and that is what I know, and that's what I want to share with people. And I will, I mean, I can count on it every single time to have somebody in my comments telling me that because I am American and because I don't have an accent or anything like that, that I am not allowed to talk about those things. I'm not allowed to practice those things. But Celtic paganism is an open practice, and that is
Yeah.
also a whole other argument that people have. It's wrong. Celtic paganism is an open practice. There are subsections of it that are partially closed, and we talked about that in the Druidry episode.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it happens to me all the time, and it definitely falls under this, and it is something that is upsetting to me because it's like this is my generational practice in my family. This is what I've always known. And then I'm having people tell me that I'm not allowed to practice that when they have no idea who I am. But also, it doesn't
Right.
matter if they did or didn't.
Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Just
Yeah.
keep in mind that what we're talking about is, folkism. So, folkism is where it's the belief that any faith, tradition, or path must be explicitly tied to and some people will pull these next ones out individually or combine them all together, is tied to a person's ancestry, culture, ethnicity, or blood, and specifically in open practices, you will still see folkism. You will still see folkists who will say, well, if you aren't 100%, in my case, I see them all the time with Hellenic polytheism.
Yeah.
If you're not 100% Greek and live in Greece, you have no right to be part of the Hellenic polytheist,
Which honestly
community.
doesn't make yeah, that doesn't make sense to me because, like, there a lot of people who live in America now, their ancestors or, great-great-grandmothers or, whoever immigrated from other places, and so it's like, what are we supposed to practice? If we were born
Right.
here, but we're not indigenous to this land, right? Like, what are we supposed to practice? Are we supposed to make up a new practice?
I rarely get into like the back and forth, but under one of my videos about Celtic paganism, I kind of had this discussion with somebody and I was like, "Dog, I don't know how to explain immigration to you." Like if you you know what I mean? Like it's just like people come from all over. But also in open practices, you don't have to have the lineage. And it doesn't matter if you were like, you know, 50 ancestors ago is where you had that lineage. It doesn't matter if you don't have it at all. If it's an open practice and you're called to it, it's open.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. My name is Ariel Willow. I'm a clairvoyant medium and occultist with over a decade of experience of helping others build deeper connections with spirit and themselves and improve or reconnect to their abilities. My services cater towards abilities coaching, deity practice, astrology, and more. Visit www.arielwillow.com to find out more. It's time to step into your power.
Are you new to witchcraft or wanting to improve your practice? Then my Patreon is for you. My name is Alyssa. I am a practitioner with over 10 years of experience, and I want to help you to take your practice to the next level. Within my Patreon, you'll find information on the history of witchcraft, the science of magic, exercises for strengthening your clair abilities, spellcrafting and how-tos, baneful magic, and so much more. Join today via patreon.com/LaRusa Mystic. Let me help you unlock your magic.
Hi, my name is Becca, and I'm the owner of the Mystics Lounge. I'm a medium, clairvoyant, and intuitive with over a decade of experience. My goal is to help you better connect with yourself, spirit, and the world around you through spirit team sessions, mediumship, past life sessions, and tarot readings. You can find me and book at themysticslounge.com or find me on TikTok at the Mystics Lounge, and that is Mystics with an S. I'm excited to meet you and help you find new avenues of communication with spirit.
Okay, so we are going to now explore some red flags that we think are important for you to keep in mind and to watch out for as you are consuming spirituality related media of many different types, whether it's books or whether it's social media, etc. Or if you're going to be seeking out professional assistance in the spiritual world or witchcraft world, etc. So there's a few different red flags to keep in mind as you are moving your way through your spiritual journey. And the one of the ones that is really, really obvious is excessive control, meaning that the person or you see that the other person doing this to other people, whether it's to you or to other people. Be cautious if somebody tries to control what you think or control what you do. And again, this is very much linked to what we were talking about before with spiritual superiority and spiritual manipulation. Excessive control is one of the ways that people will try to manipulate. And so everyone has the freedom to make their own choices. You have the freedom to pull yourself away from people like that and to not support people like that who exhibit excessive control.
Another thing is lack of accountability. So if this person refuses to admit that they make mistakes or refuses to address mistakes that they've made or missteps, crossing boundaries, things like that, that is really, really important to keep in mind. It's really important for the people who you're learning from or that you are receiving sessions from to be people who are willing to say, "Hey, I was wrong about this thing. I want to apologize," or I want to correct myself. I said this, it came across this way. That's not how I intended it. Like it shows a level of maturity that's really important for someone that you're learning from. You want to be learning from someone who's comfortable being uncomfortable in that way. So that can be really, really important as well.
Another one would be exploitative practices. So This is when people are trying to sell you something that doesn't really offer a lot of value. And not only that, they're trying to sell it at an outrageous price. And they are convincing you that you have to have this and you have to have like this, you know, couple-hour long session that they are offering at like $5,000 or this like week-long class that they're offering, but they don't actually teach a lot of information in it, or it's a lot of like this gaslighting kind of thing where they're trying to tell you what you should believe in and you should believe in their way. And you'll see this a lot in many different ways, and through many different means, but you have to be careful when somebody is trying to take advantage of you, and especially when they're trying to pressure you into spending that amount of money on their programs or their services that don't actually provide value, but they make you feel bad if you don't purchase it or make you feel less than.
Another one is isolation and alienation. And this one can be so nefarious because it can start small and then get worse, just like we were talking about earlier in the
Mhm.
frog in the boiling water. So pay attention if there's someone who tries to separate you from your friends, your family, your support systems, and try to pull you away from the people that you know and that you trust. And you should know that healthy spiritual spaces will encourage connections, will encourage the sharing of information, personal growth, respecting existing relationships and respecting personal boundaries and spiritual boundaries, etc. And where this can get really, really dangerous is if you this is also tied to the spiritual superiority, as well, and spiritual manipulation and even discriminatory, where if you have an experience where somebody is trying to tell you that only they can be trusted, or what you're experiencing with them is too special and too unique to share, so like
Mhm.
making you keep secrets or
Yeah.
keep promises that you
Mhm.
can't share with other people because it's only nobody else will understand and nobody
Yeah.
else can be trusted, like this can get very, very dangerous. Or they make you feel like you are, like only you and nobody else in your life is worthy of something that they are either selling, or like a manipulative tactic to try to draw you in by making it seem very exclusive in some way.
Mhm.
That can be a tactic for isolation and alienation. So be very cautious of that. You want to surround yourself with people who encourage community, connections, growth, and discernment and boundaries, and not just understanding them, but enforcing them. And in a space where you will not be pulled away from everything and everyone that you love.
And another one is lack of boundaries. This can kind of go into the gaslighting and spiritual manipulation as well, because someone can also make you feel like it's wrong for you to not feel comfortable with them sharing something with you or make you feel guilty about it, which we'll get into the next point. But lack of boundaries does also go into ethics, which we'll get into in a little bit as well. But boundaries would look like someone sharing information with you that you did not consent to hearing. So, for example, someone might tune into your situation without your consent, try to share that information with you when you aren't comfortable hearing it. For example, maybe some situation is happening between you and a partner or something like that, and you share with this person in confidence what's going on, and then they use the excuse that they had a dream about your relationship, or a deity's talking to them about your relationship and things like that. That can show a lack of boundaries that needs to be addressed. It's okay to set boundaries with friends. It's okay to set boundaries with leaders of a spiritual community, someone you trust, someone you don't trust. Like, boundaries are so important in so many areas of life. So don't be afraid to set them. If something makes you uncomfortable, don't be afraid to just say, I don't feel comfortable having you tune into this. Like, I didn't consent to you doing that. It's not comfortable for me when you do that. That is a really important thing to keep in mind, because that is also your spiritual protection. It's a protective measure and it should be utilized.
Another good one is excessive pressure or guilt. So it's really important that you pay attention to people or groups that try to make you feel guilty or force you into a certain way of believing or practicing, or even financial commitments, because genuine spiritual spaces encourage personal growth without using manipulation tactics. And they don't want you to feel like you are being pressured to be there or that you feel guilty for not doing something. Genuine spiritual spaces encourage you to grow as you will and follow your path as you will and be there to support you and to hear different perspectives about the craft, because no two people practice the same. So it's important that you understand when people are trying to pressure you into their ways of believing or into some kind of retreat that you don't feel comfortable going to. That's a huge financial commitment, or a different practice that you're not comfortable practicing. If somebody is pressuring you into it or making you feel excessively guilty for the way that you choose to practice with your own path, that is a red flag.
Exactly. And another one is intolerance and judgment. So be aware of spaces where there is intolerance, judgment, exclusion based on things like race, gender, and also in beliefs as well. So this is directly tied to the exclusionary or discriminatory practices that we were talking about before, where people are treated unfairly. Because in authentic spiritual growth and in authentic spiritual communities, they embrace diversity, they respect different perspectives. They can have an open, mature dialogue about differing perspectives and different beliefs and traditions and things like this. I actually experienced this before, even just recently. I joined a Discord group and I got uh, asked what I practice and I shared. And then they explicitly asked me if I talk to people who have passed on. And I said, yeah, I talk to like my ancestors and spirits and things like that, and I got kicked out of the Discord group, and it was very strange to me because it was marketed as a very tolerant place for pagans, um, except if you identify or believe you can speak with people who have passed on. So
Yeah.
everybody's
Mhm.
allowed there except for you, if that's where you fall into, which was very strange to me. So that was just one example, and but there are many where it can be a lot more nefarious and a lot more abusive than even that example. So just beware of this sense of intolerance and judgment when it is based on race, gender, or beliefs.
And another one is lack of transparency. So, this can be a really tough one because sometimes it won't be as apparent as others. This one can kind of go under the radar for a little bit sometimes because it will just seem like someone just, doesn't want to talk about something or they just don't feel comfortable about it. So, this can sometimes look like someone being asked a question about something and they're just like, oh, well, I don't feel comfortable talking about that when they have previously stated that they're very knowledgeable in that area.
Mhm.
Things like that. If someone doesn't want to answer a question, they're not under any obligation to answer it. But if they claim that they are experienced in a certain area or something like that, they should be able to answer simple questions about that thing or state that they are still learning about it and still gathering that knowledge. People who, especially, are spiritual teachers should be comfortable in saying, "Oh, I know about this due to the experiences I've had or the research that I've done, but this area of that thing or this area of this other thing is something that I'm still learning about." That should be something that they're comfortable doing. Vulnerability, as far as like where you're at in your learning of something, but also transparency and authenticity is really important in spiritual leaders and in teachers that you are going to or mentors. So if you feel like they're withholding things, just, keep things at arm's length until you can feel better about them kind of being more open and honest and willing to provide information about what it is that you're looking to learn.
So now that we've covered a whole bunch of topics around toxic spirituality and some red flags to watch out for, it is only appropriate that we kind of segue in to mention ethics and spirituality, which is something that we've touched on in a few of our previous podcast episodes before. But
Mhm.
I think it's important in this context as well because spiritual ethics refers to the principles, values, and moral guidelines that guide individuals in their spiritual beliefs and their practices. So it involves understanding and integrating ethical considerations into one's spiritual journey, especially if they offer spiritual services, and recognizing the interconnectedness between spirituality and ethical behavior. And
Yeah.
Ariel, there is something around this that you wanted to mention.
Yes, and that is ethics within mediumship, which Alyssa and I went over this in our mediumship episode, as well as in our death work episodes as well. But it's something that I see often in mediumship spaces, especially where people are tuning into someone's loved one. And here's the thing that I want to mention is that as someone with intuitive gifts, if you are someone who experiences spirit or you receive intuitive information, it's okay to receive that information without asking for it, right? Sometimes that's going to happen, and there's not really a way to avoid it. But the difference, and this is where I think people lose discernment, is that just because you got information doesn't mean that you're meant to share it.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
it's really important to make sure that if you're walking through the grocery store and you see someone's grandmother standing next to them, it doesn't mean that you are meant to go up to that person and tell them that because they might have a really bad past with their grandmother and you may
Mhm.
trigger that person by mentioning that. There are ethical ways that you can go about offering your services to someone if you choose to do that, but there's also ethical ways that you can approach someone and ask them whether or not they want to receive that information. This has happened to both Becca, Alyssa, and I, personally, where people will come into our DMs and be like, "I'm picking this up on you," and I'm like,
Yes.
"Well,
Mhm.
It's so
what?"
inappropriate.
It's
It
so
is
strange and
it's
It's
so
violating.
inappropriate.
extremely uncomfortable for
Don't
us,
like
and
it.
it's so uncomfortable because we did not ask those people to tune in for us, and even though I understand a lot of times why people are doing that, some people have good intention with it, and some people just want their abilities to be seen by someone that they think is, superior to where they are or, like, has better gifts than them so that they can be validated in their gifts. Regardless of the reasoning behind doing that, it makes people uncomfortable. I never asked someone to tune in, things like that. So there's an awareness that has to be there of why you're approaching someone with information. Are you doing it to manipulate a certain outcome, to validate your experience, or to pressure someone into purchasing something from you? Like these are questions that you have to ask for yourself. And in addition to that, if you are someone who is going to be offering services to people, one of the first things that I learned from the spiritual business course that I took way, way, way back when was have ethics clearly stated on your website. And I have since that day had ethics listed on my website because I think it's really important for me to list out those ethics for people to see. I want people to be able to see clearly and laid out in front of them the ethics that I follow within my business. And, like, for example, not trying to diagnose someone with mental conditions or medical conditions because we're not medical practitioners. We're not medically trained. We are spiritual practitioners, and the sessions we offer should be for entertainment and or spiritual purposes only. They shouldn't be used as a replacement for doctors or therapists or things like that. And that's an ethic that you can follow in your business and that you should follow because it's not appropriate unless you are medically trained to have that be something that you can include in your practice that is spiritual. Like it's not spiritual, that's medical. It's a different category altogether.
I have to
Sorry.
jump in with an example.
I went on a tangent. I'm sorry.
Don't be. I have to give an example. I just saw this, like, literally just this past week. I was scrolling through TikTok and saw a TikTok live of an individual who was doing, psychic medium readings for other people, and literally verbatim, this person said, "Sometimes when I tune in, I kinda turn into a doctor. I'm seeing inflammation in your gut,
No.
and I'm not done. And I see inflammation in your gut and
No.
an undiagnosed autoimmune disorder.
What the hell?
I
No.
literally saw that this week, and I almost threw up in my mouth and swallowed it again.
Report live.
It
What
was
the fuck?
the most I did I could not. It was
N
the most unethical thing I've ever seen,
Yeah.
insofar that there are some readers who will have no problem touching on health things because it's related to, like, reading someone's energy or picking up on
Sure, sure.
some things that are going on in the whether it's in their auric field or something that's going on within the body or whatever. But if somebody is explicitly saying to you that you have like, they are diagnosing you, or if
Yeah,
they are
yeah,
making you feel afraid that you have some type of illness or disorder or something like that, or a disease, that is not an ethical that's not coming from anywhere ethical.
yeah. Well, because
Um,
you have to have discernment with that, and one way that because I've had that happen with, like, I did aura, like, photo readings for a while. And one thing is that I will see areas on someone's body where they maybe have pain or, chronic pain or something like that, but I'm not going to diagnose someone with it. I'm going to state what I see. There's a darkness around your right knee. Like, I don't know if you experience right knee pain all the time or if you had an old injury there, but just pointing that out. Like, I'm not trying to diagnose it. And there are ethical ways of going about mentioning something like that without diagnosing people with
I see a
something.
darkness on your
Right.
right
And
knee, and you definitely have cancer in your joint, and you
Yeah,
probably have
like
about
it's
3 months to live.
I've
right. Like, that's so terrible.
Like,
But you can just say, like, if it's something
jeez.
that bothers you, like, definitely get it checked out. But, like, there's ways to ethically go about that while also sharing what you're getting without overstepping. Like,
Mhm.
it's not
I
that
al
hard.
I also wanted to really quick circle back to when you were talking about reading for people that didn't consent to it. This
Yes.
also falls into when people order readings from you or you're doing live stream readings. If somebody is asking you to read on like their partner or someone that is
Yeah.
not them, and it is unethical to do that because that
Yeah.
person did not agree for you to look into their life or to tell this person about their business. And for me, that is a very strong line that I have where you're asking me to read for an unaware third party that has not given their consent verbally to me on a Zoom call. I will not do it.
Which
Yeah,
is
and that
different than if you're reading and you pick up on something for your client
right.
that's
Right.
related to another person, but
Oh,
Right.
right. Yeah.
not reading specifically into another person without
Yeah.
their consent.
And certain divinatory practices as well, like, it's kind of sometimes unavoidable, like, for example, within Lenormand, you can have another querent that would represent another person, and the cards around them can be indicating, like, what that person is experiencing, things like that. But it is important that when you're using divination, whether you're doing it yourself or you're getting a reading from someone else, it is going to focus on you, the
Mhm.
querent that they're reading for, the sitter, the person that that person is reading for, it's going to center on you. So if you're getting a reading about you and your partner, that reading is going to center on you. There may be
Mhm.
aspects indicating, like, oh, okay, there's something happening between you and your partner, and this is coming through in the cards, but it's not necessarily going to talk about the other person and how they're feeling. And oftentimes it will give advice instead on how you can approach that situation with
Exactly.
that other person rather than saying, "Oh, this person is going through this." Like, it's more so of this person is struggling. This is how you can approach that in a healthy way or in a helpful way.
So another one I really want to discuss that I think is so egregious and it is very difficult for me to kind of handle that some people do this is straight up lying or embellishing in your readings to make yourself look
No.
better or
Mhm.
because you don't want to deliver the message or information that you got because you lack the skills to do so.
Or
It
you
is
wanna make
not
it sound, like, extra cool or something like that.
right. It is not okay to lie in your readings. That is, I mean, I can't even go into the number of reasons why that is not okay. People do it in past life readings where they want to
Mhm.
tell people that they are this grandiose person or thing or entity or divinity or being in their past life when that was not true, but they're doing it because they want to boost their sales. You have it in, I mean, multiple different kinds of readings, any reading that you can get. There are readers who will lie to you. And that is why it is so important that when you get a reading, that you take the information and you ask yourself if that feels right to you, if that
Mhm.
settles with you okay. And like to be honest with yourself, because if they're giving you information and a message and you're like, I don't like that that's calling me out, that is different than a message that is
Yep.
a straight up
Yeah.
lie and you know it's a lie.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or
Oh,
you
yeah.
know it's gassing you up or something. And I mean, and that can even happen like in coaching circles as well. Like there might be a coach that is like helping you with abilities or helping you with your practice or helping you with whatever. And they might be like, wow, you're really amazing at this. Like I've never seen anybody else like this. Like there's hyping up your clients because you genuinely feel excited about what you're seeing them bring forward, and then there's hyping someone up because you know that that's gonna make them feel good and it's gonna make them come back.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like, I
Mhm.
if I'm hyping up a client, it's because I genuinely am seeing the
Progress.
potential. Yeah, I'm seeing progress, I'm
Tangible
seeing the
progress.
potential
Right.
for growth,
Effort.
I'm I'm seeing their their abilities coming through. I'm just
Mhm.
like, "Why are you doubting this? This is really good. Like,
Mhm.
you got all this correct. Like, I don't know why you're doubting yourself so much." Things like that. That's different when you have tangible proof that you can look back on.
I want my clients to come back to me for all of the good reasons and not because I lied to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We all want you to, like, come back to us because you want to, not because you feel like you have to or that you can't do it on your own. Because here's the thing, by lying to someone or gassing someone up when that's not the case, or you're lying to, like, make them come back, it's essentially, I guess, in a way, like gaslighting someone because you're
No, but it's
saying,
so
like,
fucked up though, because if
yeah,
somebody's coming to you for spiritual guidance and spiritual help, there is an expectation from them that you are going to be truthful and honest with what it
mhm.
is that you
Well, and it's
receive.
dangerous too because it can put people in psychosis.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Like, if
lying
you were
truly is
yeah.
manipulative.
Mhm. If you tell someone that they are a god, you better be a frickin' therapist ready to take them through a course of therapy after that because, like, it's very scary to see clients come to us who have been told the things that they've been told by other readers.
Mhm.
It
Yep.
and
Dropping
it's not the
these
client's
egregious,
fault.
grandiose claims
Yeah.
that leave the person confused and not knowing what to do with it, and it's, like, life-altering information. And it's not to say that that can't come through in a reading.
Yeah, and
It's
it's
just
possible, but, like,
there's
the
ways to deliver information
yeah.
that is helpful to the person, and again, this comes back to the ethics of being a
Mhm.
reader or a
Mhm.
spiritual somebody who administers spiritual advice or spiritual
Yes.
guidance
You
is
have to know what your client is ready for
you have to
and what
Mhm.
level
understand
they're at.
yeah, all of that, but also too, you have to understand how like, where they're at on their path. Are they new? Do they understand some of the basics,
Mhm.
like foundations to protect themselves or, like, to be able to identify if something doesn't feel right, etcetera? Like, again, like we were saying before, like, if it doesn't feel right, trust that
Mhm.
it's not feeling right. And
Yeah.
it's okay to go to other readers and, like, be like, "Hey, can you confirm this? Like, this is what
Yeah.
Mhm.
another
Yeah.
reader said." Like, we encourage that and think that that's great to do that.
Yes.
It just gets like, lying oh my god. You wanna know the worst part is when you see these quote unquote tarot readers that will, like, pull out the death card and be like, "Your lover's
No.
coming
Yeah.
back."
That
It'll
shit
be like 10
grinds
of
my
swords
bones.
and they're like, "You are gonna get everything you want."
Yep. Yep.
No. Yeah,
"Your
I
soulmate's coming next month."
mhm.
You're
Yeah,
like,
and
"What
I'm
the
just like,
fuck?"
I yeah, well, because, like and here's the thing, because like, with tarot specifically, like, there are meetings for certain cards, right? Like, death would be transformation and rebirth and things like that, unavoidable change. But, like, if someone is like, "Your love is coming back," yeah, I guess in a very, very remote world, that could apply, depending on the other cards that are coming through. Maybe it's indicating a rebirth of some kind, a death, an ending of a cycle and things like that, depending on the other cards. But like, if someone, like, you have, it's
Mhm.
context and discernment, and you can't, with tarot specifically, you can't make the cards what you want them to be the way that you can typically sometimes with oracle. Like, it's not the way that that works. If you want to do that, make your own deck, have at it. Like,
I'm
You
telling you,
go for it,
anybody who
babes.
understands or like knows the meaning of tarot can spot someone bullshitting their way through a tarot
It's
reading, no
Mhm.
so
problem.
fast, so
You can
fast.
spot it so easily. It's like this
You can
person doesn't
smell it like rain.
they're talking out of their ass. They don't know what the hell they're
Mhm.
talking about. Ultimately, though, the red flags that we've gone through, we are giving you these examples of these different red flags and the behavior that would be counterintuitive to being ethical in spirituality. But the same goes to not just for you on the receiving end of guidance, but also you giving it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and this is something that Alyssa and I have mentioned in previous episodes too, is that we don't want it to sound like we are the only people you can trust. Like,
No.
always use discernment and
Yep.
don't be afraid to question readers, even if
Yep.
you are familiar with them.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
I don't care if I'm getting a reading from Becca or someone I've never met before. That is something that I'm still gonna use my discernment around. Does it feel correct
Mhm.
for me? Does it feel good
Mhm.
for me? Does it apply to
Mhm.
my life? Things like that. Does it feel right for me in my practice? Regardless of who you're getting readings from, like, use discernment, check in with yourself, and see if it feels right, because you can feel like you know someone really well, but you still should use discernment, just because that is part of keeping yourself safe. Because all of this whole episode is to try to help you all stay safe. And part of that safety is also looking out for yourself, right? You
Mhm.
can't expect other people to look out for you because not everybody has your best intentions at heart. So you have to be able to look out for yourself and don't be afraid to question things. And I don't care if it's me, Alyssa, Becca, whoever the fuck you're getting a
Mhm.
reading from or a session from. If something doesn't feel right, don't be afraid to ask people to validate it or find confirmation in your own connections with your own divination or things like that. Like, don't be afraid to question things. Yes, there's a point where we can kind of question things to the point of just pulling everything apart. But at some point, like, don't don't stop yourself from asking why or clarifying. Like, there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with doing that. You're gonna know what your stopping point is, but
Mhm.
don't be afraid to do that, regardless of who it is.
There's also the flip side too, as someone and I've been both the giver of questions, from readings and also the receiver of questions from readings that I have administered. And the important part is to recognize the other side, which is you going to someone asking questions. Now, this is fine. When communicating that, you have a question, the reader or the administrator of the spiritual service or guidance should absolutely be open to welcoming questions or further instructions on a reading or whatever, but you should also acknowledge that abusive language or having your mind already made up and you're seeking validation for a preconceived notion or you're approaching it in a way that isn't respectful of the other person or you're trying to manipulate the information to be different than what you got because you didn't like it. There's ways to go about it where you're just having a genuine conversation where it's like, "Okay, I literally just didn't really quite understand this last bit. Do you mind explaining further?"
Yeah,
The
yeah,
person should be able to be like, "Absolutely. Here's the further context." But if you come back and you're just like, "Well, this doesn't make sense to me. Are you sure you got what you got?" That's not fair. That's not a
Mhm.
fair way to go
well,
about
because
it.
at that point, like, I think it would just make sense to just go to a different
A
reader.
different reader.
Because
Go to a
yeah,
different reader at that stage. Or if you keep coming back to the person and you don't like what you hear, as long as they're being respectful and considerate to you, it's being able to approach a reader, an administrator of a spiritual service with that respect. Like the reason why this is so I'm so passionate about this is because I'm trying to open up the dialogue for you to feel empowered to ask questions, but also if you
yeah,
are an administer if you administer readings, that you should have boundaries for people who abuse that position because it
yeah.
does
Mhm.
happen.
Yeah,
Well,
it
because it
does,
reminds
unfortunately.
yeah, and it reminds me of people who go into readings with the idea that they want the reader to prove themselves to them.
Yes.
It's
Mhm.
very much that kind of vibe of, like, I'm going in so that you can prove your abilities to me, and if you go in with the idea that you're always looking for something wrong with it, or for it to have a certain outcome that you're specifically wanting, I think that's just it can be a really detrimental way to go into a session because and it's not to say that you can't go in with certain questions or things like that. Of course, like if you want a reading about a specific situation that's happening or something, nothing wrong with asking for that. But I'm talking about like if you are going into a reading, like let's say that you like someone or something, and you're like, I want to see why this person is coming into my life, like what their purpose is going to be towards me as a person. Are they going to be someone who's going to help teach me things? Are they going to end up being a partner possibly? Things like that. That would be like a normal question that we would see come through from for a reading. But if someone was going in asking those questions, but they themselves are not going to be happy with that session, if the answer is this person is just coming through to teach you something, but not necessarily be a romantic partner, is that something that you're going to be happy with? Are you going to like refute that information that comes through just because it's not matching your idea of what you wanted? And at that point, is it helpful for you to even get a reading if that's what you're doing? Because I mean,
Like,
you can
but
do that all day with your own cards, like pull
yeah,
cards
well,
and
exactly.
make it sound the way that you want it to, you
And
know?
even too, it's like sessions and readings and things like this, they're meant to be providing you with guidance and messages
Mhm,
and personal development and new perspectives and clarity to situations in your life, allowing you to become more aware of your choices. So
mhm.
with
And
divination,
outside of your own bias.
yeah, and with divination, it's meant to tell you what you need to hear, not what you want to hear. And of course, it comes down to the delivery of the information. Some readers can be
Yeah, yeah,
really rude, but like, if you go
yeah.
to someone who can deliver it and use discernment and like isn't being abusive in the way they deliver it, okay? Like in that context, just you ultimately have, no matter like what a reader tells you, you ultimately have the power of free will and the option to change any outcome or path. So
Mhm.
Yeah,
if a reading
Yeah.
doesn't land with you, that is okay.
yeah,
That is
yeah,
okay. I
yeah.
really wish every reading did, but it's
Yeah.
not going
Oh,
to.
I wish every reading was, like, hyping me the fuck up, but sometimes they'll call me out so bad, and it
Yeah,
will just hurt, and I'm just like, "Why'd you have to
I
slap me
get
like that?"
eviscerated by my ancestors on a regular. Like, that's regular for me, and I have to be in the headspace to be willing to hear an answer I don't like.
Yeah,
Mhm.
But it
and
is
it's
not the
okay.
reader's responsibility to
Mhm.
placate you if it doesn't land with you for whatever personal reason you may have.
Right.
So, it's about respect. So, I want to make
Mhm.
sure that both sides are discussed here because both sides are important.
Yeah, and as a reader, like, there's a lot of value to, in my opinion, going into readings, understanding that people deal with anxiety, things like that. Whenever I'm going into card readings and such, where it could be something that would ignite someone's anxiety about something happening potentially in the future or an outcome of some kind, I'm trying my best to give them a bunch of different ways that that can come through so that they can discern what fits and feels best for them and feels right for that situation. And remind them that it is changeable. Like nothing is really set in stone. There's a lot of variables that can come to play out. And if you feel like you're stuck in a scenario, that's when you would either pull for yourself or go to a different reader, get a second opinion, things like that. Because a reader should leave you feeling empowered and feeling good about how to approach something and not scared, fearful, or anxious, right? Now, of course, if you suffer from anxiety, it might even be that like the reader hasn't necessarily done anything to cause that anxiety, but the anxiety comes up anyway. And that's a little bit different. But if they're leaving you feeling fearful because they're like, hey, I got the death card and I think your parent is going to die tomorrow. That's that
Yeah,
they
that's
shouldn't leave you feeling
Right.
that way. Like that's just it's not good, babes. Like, it's not.
mhm.
We're not gonna do that.
Let's not.
But yeah, with all that said, I hope this was helpful. I think this was a really good discussion to have, and I want this discussion to continue too. This is a really good thing to talk about and to
Mhm.
have as a constant discussion happening and something that we can bring up whenever. And with Alyssa's in my Discord community, we do have a channel for Ghost Tea Podcast where we do discuss the topics that we talk about and things like that. But you can also put in requests for topics that you want us to talk about as well. But if you have something or thoughts that you had come up from this episode that you want to share with us or discuss, we'd be happy to have you share it in that space or even send us an email. We love to hear your feedback and we like to be able to see how these topics and these discussions are impacting you and helping you to better your own practice and kind of review your own stuff as well. I think that's really, really important. But also for those who are interested in booking a session with Alyssa or Becca or I, you can find the links to Alyssa's and my websites on our ghosttpodcast.com, but you can also find Becca at www.themysticslounge.com. We'll have everything linked in the description below.
Thank you so much to Becca for joining us for another
Yes,
discussion.
Thank you
I'm
so much
so
for
glad.
having me. This was lovely.
Of
This
course.
such a good conversation to have, and all three of us being intuitive and clairvoyant and readers, these are conversations that come up quite often. So it's awesome to be able to have your perspective to join in on this really important topic. So thank you again for coming,
Yeah,
and it's a
all
Thank
the
you
pleasure
little
so
to have
ferns.
you.
much.
Yeah, all the ferns in the greenhouse.
Uh, and don't forget to rate and share Ghost Tea Podcast. Sharing us helps to create even more amazing episodes, and we love to hear from you, ghosties. If you're on Spotify, there's a little star button. You can press it. Give us a 5 star if you love what we're doing. And have a great rest of your month. We'll see you again next month. And thanks for tuning in.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.